Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, home of the modern whitetail hunter. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, we are joined by Dr. Grant Woods of Growing Deer TV to discuss exactly how he'd handle some of the most challenging deer hunting and management scenarios in the whitetail woods. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light. And today on the show, we're kicking off a new month-long series. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed Shooting Month back in July. I certainly did. It was what I needed. This year is all about shooting for me. I'm feeling good about it. These folks helped me out. And I am now, and hopefully you are now, ready to fully turn our attention to hunting. Because guess what? Hunting season is just about here. I mean, geez, guys. I mean, for some of you, it's just a matter of weeks probably, right? There's some August openers, some early September openers. I think my first hunt of the year is going to be somewhere around mid-September. But man, it's coming up fast, and I am excited. So from here on out, through the rest of the fall, we are going to be 100% focused on chatting with the best deer hunters in the world to get you and me and all the rest of us ready for our best season yet. It's going to be some really good stuff. And to get things going, my thought was to do a whole month of our What Would You Do episodes. We've done these over the past couple of years, so hopefully you're familiar. But if you're not, the basic gist of it is this. I get some great hunter on the line, and then I present them with a bunch of different, very specific, unique hunting scenarios. I'll tell basically a story. Like, it's this day, it's this place, it's this kind of thing, and here's what's going on. And then I ask them to explain what they would do in that circumstance, why they would do it, how they would pull it off. And you know what I found is this has ended up being one of the best ways to get new ideas and a new perspective from these really good deer hunters. And it's a lot of fun too. So I'm pretty stoked to do a full month of them. We've got a really, really good lineup scheduled for you here, and we're kicking it off today with a true legend. Dr. Grant Woods is one of the best in the world. He's a longtime wildlife biologist. He's a thought leader in the deer management world, and he's the founder and host of Growing Deer TV, which is, for, well over a decade now. It's been one of the best and most popular online hunting series that there is. He hunts and manages a great big property down in southern Missouri, but he's also traveled and consulted and hunted all over the country. So he's just got this wide kind of wealth of experience and expertise. And I think he's the perfect person to help us kind of shift our preparations into the season into overdrive. So that's the plan for today. That's the podcast we've got. I just finished my podcast with Grant, just finished chatting with him. And I can tell you, it lives up to the billing. It really was a good one. So I'm excited for you guys to hear the rest of this. But I do want to give you a quick update, some housekeeping here. If you're listening to this on the day that this episode drops, which is Thursday, August 4th, 2022, I got to give you a heads up that today is the last day of our season opener sale for Meat Eater and our family of brands, right? As you guys know, Wired to Hunt is part of the Meat Eater network, and this is basically our biggest sale of the entire year. Today's the last day. Over at First Light, they got 20 to 40% off almost the entire inventory. It's 20% off a bunch of our favorites from FHF, and Phelps Game Calls up to 50% off. And then there's a bunch of logo wear and some knife bundles and different things on sale at our Meat Eater store, where we stock all sorts of different hunting gear now too. So it's a lot to keep straight, I realize. So to make things more simple, we actually just started a new kind of curated gear page for me. And I know I mentioned last month I was going to do some Wired to Hunt monthly gear picks, and I told you to go over to the Wired to Hunt website. Well, we've kind of shifted things a little bit. We've actually got a new page now where I'm going to be putting some of my favorite items for each phase of the year, and you can see those recommendations right now. And so right now, a bunch of my selections for like the late summer scouting period and the early season hunting period, a bunch of that stuff's on sale today, August 4th. So what you got to do, if you're interested in checking out a few of these things, you go to store.themeateater.com. So that's store.themeateater.com/Mark. And there you're going to see stuff like my favorite, like the gear I'm wearing for early season hunting from First Light. You'll see the hoodie I wear. You'll see the pants I wear. You'll see the face covering I wear. I also included this new cooler I've been using all summer, my new favorite cooler I recommended on there, and my top recommendation for super cheap, budget-friendly binoculars. If you want to get a pretty decent set of glass for not a ton of money, there's a recommendation in there for you too. So go to store.themeateater.com/Mark to see my recommendations. If you're listening on the 4th, you can still get those sale prices. If not, still check out those recommendations if you're in the market for anything like that. That's my little spiel and my update. And with that out of the way, it's time to get to our first episode of What Would You Do month with the one and only Dr. Grant Woods. Let's go. All right, back with me on the show is Mr. Grant Woods. Grant, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Mark, thanks for having me.
It's been too long. I think it's been a couple years since we've had you on the show, and every time we chat, though, it's one of the best ever. So I'm glad we're getting back together.
Yeah, I enjoy our visits also.
And this is kind of a unique one. I mean, we've talked in the past on Wired to Hunt about general land management things. I know we did a podcast with the Drurys a few years ago where we dove into stuff with EHD and diseases and drought and stuff. But today, I kind of want to run you through the gauntlet. If you're willing to go there with me, Grant, I want to pitch a whole bunch of hypothetical hunting scenarios at you. And then just see how you would handle them, what you would do, what your thought process would be, what kinds of things you would be thinking about, anything along those lines. We're going to kind of go from land management stuff all the way through early season, mid-season, late season, and kind of cover a whole swath of different possible circumstances a hunter might find themselves in. So are you game to go on that journey?
Yeah, that sounds fun. This sounds awesome, man.
Yeah, it actually is pretty fun. I enjoy doing these. So I say rather than beating around the bush, we should just jump right into my first one, which is it's probably going to be a concerning, depressing thing to think about. So forgive me to start here, Grant, but I want you to imagine this scenario.
Okay.
Imagine for some reason you had to sell the proving grounds, like right now, in the middle of the summer, last minute, or you wanted to do it for whatever reason, but the proving grounds, your home turf, your home farm you've worked so hard on over the years is now gone. And it's, let's say, August 15th, let's hypothetically imagine, and now you have just picked up a new property to hunt this year, but it's just a lease. It's a smaller property, and it's just, for this year, for the interim, we're just going to pick up a lease to get me through this year. We'll see what happens after that. And on this lease, you are allowed to do some minor habitat improvements, but there's a farmer on the property as well, and he just doesn't want you to mess with his fields. He doesn't want you to mess with his crop fields. Everything else is fair game, though. You can mess with the timber a little bit. You can mess with any kind of openings, but here's the rub. You only have 2 available weekends in the summer to make whatever changes you want. So you have 2 weekends of time to do something fast to get ready for this first hunting season on this new lease. So my question for you, Grant, is this. With this very short amount of time, very late in the year on a new place, what would you do with those 2 weekends? What's the best bang for your buck and most efficient impact you can make given those constraints? What would you do? What's your thought process?
Man, that is a scary scenario there. And I think my first thing, because I'm going to be thinking about this like a lot of us, while I'm working or driving down the road, even though I have 2 weekends to have boots on the ground. So I'm gonna whip out my online map, which for me is HuntStand, and I'm gonna do just the opposite of what a lot of people do. I'm gonna look at my property, but just as important, it's a smaller lease. I'm gonna look at the neighborhood. I want to try to find the best sources that you can detect from a satellite image of food cover and water, because those resources are going to impact how deer travel through or use my lease. I'll, of course, look at food. We mentioned there's a farmer probably doing a single rotation, so he's got corn or beans, but he's not double cropping, most likely, since that's rare. So I'm going to try to learn what he's planting, and I can probably do that to some extent by if I get a last year's satellite view and it's corn, I can assume he went to beans this year with pretty good accuracy. But I want to see how much food is in the neighborhood. Maybe see if there's been any timber work around me. There's some bedding areas, some clear cuts or something. Because when I start any new project, I want to identify the best sources of food, cover, and water, find the one that's the most limited, and put that where I'm hunting.
Yep. That makes sense. So can you maybe take it one step further then? So let's imagine. Well, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll use my imagination a little bit, and I'm going to say it's pretty homogeneous habitat. I don't see fresh clear cuts on the neighbors or a bedding area, and all the farmers seem to have the same practices in the neighborhood, and all the farmers are harvesting their crops. Let's just say, I don't know where we are north south, but let's say by October 1st. There's still some hunting season out there when the crops are standing, but they get gone pretty quick, and combines are super efficient anymore. And this particular farmer is not using any cover crops. And so he said he didn't want me messing with his fields, but I'm going to try to beg him to just let me broadcast. I'm not doing anything. I'm not adding any chemicals. I'm just going to broadcast some good food plot blends. In the back corner, where likely the deer may have done some damage to his ag crops anyway, and see if I can't get, an eighth acre, quarter acre back corner fields, just make some little high-yield food plots. Those are easy. I don't have to worry about clearing trees or anything. I'm not disturbing the soil because it's going to be bare after harvest. So I'm just broadcasting seed right before rain. Hope it rains on 1 or 2 weekends I have, or right after that. And then I'm going to get boots on the ground. And that first day, man, I'm almost jogging through the woods. I've got limited time. I am on every trail and every side ridge and elevator ridge. And I'm not going to worry as much about the bottoms because I know the wind's going to swirl down there, and I prefer to bow hunt early season. So it's going to be a little tough running the bottoms. I'm going to put my eggs in the basket on the ridge tops where the wind and thermals are going to be more predictable and more consistent. And what I'm really looking for is white oaks, because deer like white oaks over red oaks during the early season. Potentially, farm place, maybe got a pear tree or something by it that would be an attraction during the early season. And just as importantly, I'm looking for any dry ponds or openings where some sun is reaching the soil. And I can just take a rake or a backpack blower and blow the leaves and duff out of the way. And again, broadcast some seed. And in that timber spot, I might throw out a bag of 10-10-10 or something. And again, make that attractive food source, because when all the farmers harvest, deer are coming to my little food plots.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Now, both in your little timber spot and in the corners of these fields where you're going to broadcast after takeout, what specifically would you try broadcasting in that kind of situation?
Okay, so just being really candid, I just designed the new blends for me, but I shared that recipe with green cover so anyone could get it. But I maintained about 10 or 15, depending on the year, little high-yield food plots. And I've just learned through the years that, there's no new magic bean, but oats. And folks, there's, everyone's, I got big buck oats or yellow oats or whatever. There's cold-tolerant oats and non-cold-tolerant oats. But anyway, I'm going to have oats and radishes and buckwheats and a few little soybeans in there to just get there early. Those are really great early season attractants, north to south. And then I'm going to have some Blancead clover and a few things like that in there that's going to come on, a month into it or so until it gets really cold, and then really light up next spring for the turkeys. Those things are just going to blow out of ground the following spring. Then I'm going to have a little cereal rye, because if I'm far enough north and it gets cold and my oats might frost off or just really become dormant and get ate to the ground, cereal rye grows down to 28 degrees. So if it's 28 degrees, and the magic about cereal rye is, let's say it's been 0 for 5 weeks, then it warms up to 28 degrees, it's going to grow a little bit. And of course, that fresh photosynthesis, fresh vegetation is going to attract deer during the late season. So I'm going to have a blend. I always prefer blends over single species. If you like that blend, it's called Heidi Ho. I call little food plots Heidi Ho. And that's exactly what I'm planting this year.
Awesome. Now, just as an aside to everyone listening, you and I, Grant, we did a podcast, like I mentioned a few years ago, all about your buffalo method, as you were calling it.
Yeah.
Where you talked about the importance of diversity and blends and everything like that. Highly recommend anyone who has a little bit more time than 2 weekends, but who really wants to rethink the way they do food plots in a more sustainable and soil-friendly way. Highly recommend looking up the buffalo method. Are you basically following the same program these days, or has that changed dramatically in the last couple of years?
Yeah, it'll change a little bit as we continue learning. And, just again, there's no new magic bean, but just trying different combination of species. We kind of refined our techniques. My soil is improving. You've been here, Mark, really rocky, tough
Yep.
place. My soil is making more gains now, and it's easier to make gains early on, right? Like it's really easy to jump when you're starting at the bottom, but it's really tough to get that last 10%. But just by stuff we've learned in timing and techniques, we're making faster gains now. And so much of a difference, we actually now call it the release process. I kind of consider it releasing creation's potential, because I've just learned through the years that there's soil, even degraded soil, if you treat it right, just within a year or two, it has so much potential. I haven't paid for any fertilizer except a little hydro food plot or something in 8 years now.
Wow.
I haven't bought any herbicide in a couple years. I spend, and I like tractor time, but with my technique, I spend a lot less time on a tractor, which gives me more time to go be in a tree stand or hang a tree stand or something.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, Grant, since that conversation where we dove into that, I have spent the last 2 years, trying something, a poor man's version of what you're doing, and have seen, pretty darn good success, and have really enjoyed diving into this different way of going about things. So thank you again for sharing what you've been doing and how you're doing it, because it's been helpful to me, and I'm sure many other people too. So it's cool to see that come together. Okay.
Yeah.
So here's another scenario. We'll say, let me take, I guess we'll stick with the original property that we're talking about here, but let's give it a little bit more specificity and say it's 40 acres. That's it.
Okay.
And it is a mixture of that timber and some of that ag, like we talked about. It's surrounded by similar. Here's the problem. Here's the thing you discover for the next year, let's say. You discover that you have a neighborhood around you of folks who are hovering on your property lines in a big way, like to a point where it's dramatically impacting you. You're seeing them all the time. They're bumping deer. It's become something that's become a real challenge in one way or another for you. So now you're entering year 2. How, if at all, would you adjust your property, your plan? Let me add one more thing, which is that you now own this 40 acres. So you can now do whatever you want. You bought this 40. Yeah. Now you can change things up, and you're trying to deal with these line-hugging neighbors that have been a challenge. What do you do now?
Yeah, in those situations, I like to make my cover right on the outside edge for a couple of reasons. I like it really thick and gnarly so people can't see in, and a lot of them don't even want to walk through it. So I'm gonna purposely design my bedding areas or my daytime cover areas on the edges of my property. And deer will bed on edge, no problem. And then as part of that design, I have to think, how can I locate the property? Is my only access through the south, or can I, pay the neighboring farmer a few bucks and come in from the east, or, how can I get there? And I'm going to really intentionally design my little hidey-ho food plots so I can approach, hunt, and exit with multiple wind directions without alerting deer. And that may mean I'm just taking a backpack blower and making a walking trail around the whole outside of property, because I only have one access point, and depending on the wind that day, I'm just going on the downwind side. I may go 3/4 of the way around just so I don't booger up the deer walking through the middle, and then cut in 150 yards to my scrape line or my food plot or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna have to hunt really strategically, because there's always advantages. You can always make lemonade somehow. If the neighbors are kind of line huggers and probably careless hunters and putting a lot of pressure on deer, and I can create my property and hunt it in a way that becomes a de facto sanctuary, less pressure than the other properties. I'm still hunting it, but I'm thinking through how I approach, hunt, and exit every time I go there. Deer are going to naturally want to be on my property, even though it's 40 acres. And they give a real quick, perfect example that years ago at Itchway, which is a 28,000 acre research property in southwest Georgia that the University of Georgia heads up a lot of research. I was, of course, grad student, got to work down there a little bit. Another colleague of mine built 4 80-acre enclosures that were coyote proof. Coyote's a big problem down there, about 1.5 feet deep, wire in the ground, and 4 feet tall. and had a bunch of GPS collared does in the area. And the bottom line is, when it comes fawning season, the majority of does out of all that land in those areas went into the 80-acre coyote-proof enclosure to fawn because they knew it was safer.
Hmm.
And
Interesting.
so you may not be able to reduce 100% of pressure, or certainly you probably can't remove 100% of predators. But if you can reduce the pressure or predators lower than your neighbor, then it's kind of like you and I being thrown in the middle of Ukraine right now or something. Man, we're going for cover. We're never
Yeah.
totally safe, but we want to be as safe as we can.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. One kind of follow up when it comes to, paying extra attention to your access. There's more and more people these days, it seems like, kind of leaning towards wheeled access as a way to reduce the pressure. So whether with a bike or an e-bike or a UTV or a buddy driving in with a truck, where have you fallen these days more recently on that side of things? Do you do that a lot still? Is that a part of your strategy?
I do. I do. My land's real steep, so I'm kind of chicken riding an e-bike up and down my hills. I'm afraid I'll take a face plant somewhere. But buggies, four wheelers, your wife taking you out in a pickup if you're that lucky, whatever it is, anywhere. I'm pretty blessed with a pretty good sized property. But deer hear vehicles, my place, neighbor's place, local highway, whatever, every single day. And so I have no problem getting dropped off 3 feet from my stand in a vehicle at 10 till 3 in the afternoon. I would much rather do that than walk a quarter mile in there and the wind's blowing across me that whole quarter mile and making a big old scent stream out there. So for years we've been big on getting dropped off or getting in there without walking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the last thing I want to say about that, if you have a property that's pretty secluded and you haven't been there all year, and then opening day of hunting season, you're buzzing every road with your UTV, you're probably burning up the deer a little bit. But if you're like me, you're checking trail cameras, you're working food plots, you're moving stands, they're just used to it. It's not something that alerts deer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all about, maintaining consistency. And once they come to realize that wheels and vehicles are a consistent thing, it no longer is out of the norm, and they can live with that, right?
Yeah, you may see one that bounces off in the woods 50 yards and watches you go by or something, but not like they smelled a big old ugly guy walking out through there and say, "Oh man, last time I smelled that, it thundered real loud, and Mama fell over dead." So I don't want to smell that again.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's step away from that hypothetical and now kind of go back to your current situation. You're on the proving grounds, and I don't know exactly when you plant your fall release blend, but let's say whenever that period comes and goes, you plant your fall, you broadcast your fall blend into your spots in that late summer time period. Yeah. And you were supposed to get great rain, but let's say like the next day the forecast completely changes and now there's nothing. And you mentioned to me earlier today that you're in the midst of a real gnarly drought. So let's say this drought continues and you go a week without that rain, and then 2 weeks without that rain, and maybe 3 weeks without that rain. Now opening day is either here or almost here, and all that stuff staring you in your face, and you have this dried up, almost non-existent food plot. What do you do in that situation to salvage your situation, if at all?
Yeah, great point. So on a backup, we're going to plan about 45 to 60 days before the average first frost date in the fall here at this latitude. That happens to be about October 15th. So, August 15th on, when the weather person says we got a really good chance of rain, we're going to spread seed. And we've had, 80% chance for when it doesn't rain. And I will assure you, in a little small hunting plot or hide-o plot, squirrels, cardinals, turkeys, whatever, can wipe out a bunch of seed quick. And I don't know how they eat that much. You spread 30 pounds out there and you see a few squirrels run down, that's no big deal. Next time you go out there, you got a Boone and Crockett squirrel running around and no seed germinating. So that's a real pain. And I'm always going to have 4 or 5 options. I like to monitor scrapes year round, those bigger communal scrapes that they're probably not pawing the ground, but they're using the overhanging limb. I love bottlenecks. I mean, I like a good bottleneck as much as I do anything. So I'm going to create bottlenecks, pinch points by whatever method I need to on that property. Is that's making a gap in an interior fence, or have a pond and it's really dry, or whatever it is. I'm looking for those bottlenecks because deer, unless they're unless they've been disturbed there, they're going to use bottlenecks every day. You want to hunt them knowing that disturbance is a real no-no. And one thing, a good friend of mine from Wisconsin, I've always kind of tinkered with it, but I think he's perfected it. Vic takes a stick or a piece of grapevine or something like that, instead of making a full mock scrape, which I do every year, and drive my T-post in the ground and wire a tree or a branch to it or whatever. And he just takes some paracord and hangs these sticks down out of a tree on a trail or a food plot or whatever, about 4 feet off the ground. And I don't know what it is. If the deer, I hate to use the word playing, that's Walt Disney is, but
Right.
They bump those sticks around for 20 minutes at a time. It is shocking to me. And I'm not taking any credit. My buddy Vic does this and just had tremendous results. They spend time there and they turn at different angles so you get a good shot angle. The tree you made the mock scrape out of is not blocking your view if they come in the wrong way. So I'm going to have some of those this year in various places.
So it's just a piece of grapevine or branch that's hanging down off of some paracord, basically as a licking branch, but a vertical kind of hanging.
Yeah, a vertical licking branch, but it's got a lot of movement to it. He may tie it 5-6 feet above, or where the limb is in that situation. And his trail camera videos, my goodness, those deer spend a lot of time there.
Interesting. Now, is there any planting option? Like if you have that drought the last 3 more weeks, is there something that you would try to still go back out and broadcast, into late September, or something that can get you a little extra anything, or is it out of the question at that point?
No, I'm going to plant that same blend. Again, cereal rye is really drought resistant and cold hardy, but I'm going to wait for soil moisture. I'm too old to waste money on seed anymore. If there's no moisture and no rain in the forecast, or the forecast doesn't pan out as you had anticipated, I'm going to get some more seed. And at that time, I've missed my ideal planting window. Now I'm 10 days before the first expected frost. Now, these are average frost dates. So ours is October 15th. I've seen it not frost here till mid-November. So I'm going to gamble. Okay, we're going to get some more warm temperatures. Remember, it's not just warm temperature, though. You need a certain amount of sunshine for those plants to photosynthesize, and those days are getting shorter and shorter. But I'm going to throw it out. Hopefully it turns green. When food is, when food is short for deer in the deer world, gosh, I think they'd probably lick a green pickup. So I want to turn it green if I can.
Yeah.
And then also I love the turkey hunt. So I want that green spot out there as a strut zone in the spring also.
Yeah. Is there a cutoff date? Is there any date where you're like, okay, it's finally too late to try?
If you're getting frost for here, I kind of figure like November 1st is, I have failed. There's just no way to salvage this. And at that time, I'm not having much weed pressure or anything. I'm going to wait and frost seed some clover as soon as I can in the spring.
Okay. Let's shift away from property work now and talk a little bit more on the hunting side. Let's say we're moving into opening day of hunting season. Mm-hmm. And to make this, applicable to as many people as possible, let's say that the property you're hunting is on the smaller side. It's not huge. It's kind of, I don't know, let's say 100 some acres, give or take.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people around it. There's a lot of folks that hunt in the neighborhood. Let's, we'll put you up in northern Missouri, maybe more towards the, St. Louis area. So there's a lot of folks that get after it. Okay. And opening day is in the forecast. You're looking at it and you're thinking, man, I've had this game plan in place. There's a big shooter buck that's been, he's been showing up on camera. I've got, everything lined up for this. I know that first day is usually one of your best chances because there haven't been people hunting. But here's the big issue. The weather forecast for opening day and the next few days after that is very hot, a subpar wind, muggy, just kind of the worst case scenario as far as what you dream of for great deer hunting conditions. So the question is this, Grant. Do you go and hunt opening day despite the lousy weather because, it's your only hunt pre-hunting pressure before other guys mess things up? Or do you say, no matter what, I'm not hunting there until the perfect weather or the perfect wind, and you wait till 4 or 5 days into the year risking the possibility that your neighbors might hunt all 4 of those days and booger everything up regardless. What would you do in that situation?
Yeah, I am with the high. I do not like high humidity days. Your scent is just whiffing everywhere. So I'm certainly not hunting my prime areas. I usually have what I call an observation stand. Some people call it the brother-in-law stand. You don't think you're going to really see a shooter buck or maybe no deer there. Just because it's opening day and I've planned to be off work that day, I'm going hunting. But it's hot and muggy and the wind is still. I am not going to a good area. I'm just going on the edge and probably got my binoculars at the ready more than I do my bow. I'm just, looking 300-400 yards out. I've had that kind of visibility and I'm not going to a good area. Even now, I mean, here at my place, if the conditions aren't right, I'll go sit on a bluff on a ridge top and look over areas or something. I'm not going into a prime area. Those prime areas that you've worked, maybe hang a stand and cut some lanes or plant a little food plot or whatever. Dr. Carl Miller used to be my roommate for a little bit at University of Georgia. Brilliant guy, has done some great research, and we know that deer have memory. And I would rather give up 5 days. And my other thinking here is if it's bad conditions, although neighbors are probably getting busted and maybe alerting deer, they got a chance of bumping them in my land. They're probably not killing a lot of deer because the conditions are so bad, certainly mature deer. So I'm going to let them hunt, and I'm just going to let them maybe bump a few bucks in there to my area and let them realize that's a safer part of their home range. And I'm just going to do an observation hunt.
Yep. Okay. I follow you. Here's another one. And I think this is actually something that you'll be able to relate to. I think you had a somewhat similar experience with a buck you called swoops. But let's say you've got one buck on your property that you have been after for several years, and he's been on your mind. He's been the one. And for whatever reason, he's always been one step ahead of you. He either only shows up in daylight when you're, on vacation, and then when you go hunt, he's showing up there, or he's in the stand you were hunting yesterday, and then you go back there, and then he's where you were the day before, whatever it was. He's always where you're not, and you're always close, but not close enough. You've hunted him, let's say, we'll say not 6 or 7 years like you did, but let's say you hunted him 2 previous years. Now you're into year 3. Your 3rd year hunting this buck now you have 2 really good years of history with. What kinds of things would you focus on or change when it comes to your hunting strategy or setups or scouting and trail cameras, anything like that, to dial it in now on year 3 when you're saying, gosh, he's evaded me for so long, I have to make it work now, and you decide to switch it up? What would those things be?
Yeah, that is a great scenario that I think a lot of us face.
Yeah.
I keep trail camera pictures of bucks that are, let's just say, 3 years old or older, year after year after year. And, I'll give them a name or put them in a file or whatever. And the first thing I'm going to do is really study. I'm going to get a pencil and paper out, and I'm going to look at the dates and exactly where that camera was or where he was. I'm going to plot it out. I mean, because I have found that oftentimes mature bucks, even more so as they reach older age classes, not only have a generic pattern, they may show up on the exact same day at a food plot or location, a scrape, that they did the year before.
Isn't that something?
It is really uncanny to me at how accurate that is. So I'm really going to look at the past and say, okay, early season, he's using the south part of where I get to hunt, and specifically this White Oak Ridge or whatever it is. And then about 2 or 3 weeks into it, I don't get any more pictures of him down there, but I start picking up some pictures the next ridge over. I'm going to really point that data down. And then I'm going to ask myself to be honest with myself and say, why have I not tagged that buck? Where's he busting me? What am I doing wrong? It's not the deer's fault, right? He's just doing his thing. It's our fault. And I'm going to really review my hunting techniques, my choices, my timing, because I need to change. I do not want to do the same thing I've been doing. And I think those 2 things paired have helped me tag some bucks that have avoided me for multiple years, which is frustrating and fun at the same time, right? When that does come together, a year or 2 or 3 later, whatever, gosh, what a reward that is.
So true. On the trail camera front, this is something I'm always curious about, different people's takes on this. When you're trying to zero in on one specific buck, let's say maybe you did this with swoops, maybe not, but when you're trying to zero in on a deer, let's say you have just the one that you really want, and you're trying to close the net around him in one form or another, what do you do with your cameras differently, if at all, to help you fine-tune that pattern? Do you start moving them in tighter and tighter into one area, or do you put more out in his range, or do you never change your trail camera strategy and always have a basic blanket approach year after year because you still want cameras in the north corner because maybe a new buck will show up? What's your take on that?
Yeah, great thought again, Mark. I do change my trail camera placement pretty frequently based on MRI, most recent information. And in that scenario, I'm going to work really hard not to crowd or alert the deer. Alerted deer is so much tougher to hunt. And so if he's back on the South 40 again, he's back in there, I'm going to just place cameras along roads or edges of plots or somewhere I can get midday that there's almost zero chance I'm going to bump him. It's hot enough, the scent is rising, the air is rising. I'm probably going in with scent control, even though I'm not hunting. But I'm not penetrating, 150 yards in the timber to get to that white oak tree or something. I'm just not going to take a chance of busting that deer out there. So I may move some more cameras in the area, but they're going to be on the outskirts of the area. I just want to see if I can find him and if he's coming or going. And I have done this, and I'm always surprised that, okay, here's a spot on this road I can see 30 yards. There's really no redeeming reason here, but I'm just going to put a camera here because I'm not getting anything on this camera on the other side of the farm. And you whip it out there at, call it gut instinct, call it whatever it is, but you don't really see any reason to put it there. And all of a sudden that buck's walking 7 yards from the camera. So I'm going to put my cameras in his area, but I'm not going very far off the road or where I can access real easily.
Yeah. What about camera density? How many cameras you'll put in a small area. I spent some time last fall with Tom Ingerbo, and I was shocked by the way he uses cameras. He will, in an acre area, like an acre food plot or a little acre bedding knob, he'll have 3, 4, 5 different cameras in this little area pointed in every different direction, or two sides of the trail or both sides of the water hole and two different trails that come into it. I mean, he very, very thoroughly covered certain zones. Do you ever do anything like that? Or if not, what is the density you get so that you can, get the full picture, or at least enough of the picture?
I do that when I do suspect there's a certain buck in the area that I or one of my guests or someone would like to tag. And Tom is a very skilled outdoorsman, so I'm certainly not going against Tom, but I do the same thing, but not just willy-nilly. I mean, I know there's something going on in there. I can't quite figure it out. And again, I'm not going to wade through the bedding area to do this, but as close as I can get and feel I'm not disturbing the deer, I'll stack several in the area. I kind of look at it like trapping. If I've got a good crossroads and there's a lot of coyotes in there, I'm not going to put one trap there. I'm going to put 3 or 4 because, of course, coyotes often travel as smaller units. And if I think I got a buck, man, he's crossing this ridge somewhere, going to this water source somewhere. Heck yeah, I'm going to put 3 or 4 cameras in there because I'm just guessing otherwise.
Yeah. So one more trail camera situation then for you. And this we'll zoom out to a slightly more generic situation. So let's not say we're trying to kill one specific buck, but instead this is just, hey, let's go back to that 40-acre property we mentioned earlier. You've got this 40-acre property, and now I want to just better understand what your typical starting point trail camera setup would be. So let's imagine, I'll give you a little more detail on this property now. Let's imagine it's 40 acres. And you have 2 food plots. Those are your 2 food sources. The rest of the 40 acres is timber, brush, that kind of stuff, of which 2 really good bedding thickets are within. So you've got 2 food plots. You've got 2 really great bedding thickets. And let's say one of those thickets is in the valley. One of those thickets is up on a ridge. Okay, there's your property. You have 4 cameras at your disposal. Where and how would you place your 4 cameras across this type of property?
If it's early season and I don't believe deer have dispersed and chasing acorns all up down the ridges, I'm going to focus on those food plots, assuming I've got a decent food plot crop in there, plan to establish one. And even if the deer are getting there after dark, I'm going to pay attention to, what direction they came from, where they exited. And once I get a hint of a pattern, then I'll chase them a little bit, back up 100 yards, 200 yards, whatever. I myself stay out of bedding areas until the pre-rut, and then I try to stay out of it if I can. That's a real sensitive area. Deer, having a lot of GPS collars on deer throughout my career, if you bump a deer from a bedding area, they tend to get a little bit more upset than if you bump one off a food source or something like that. And they expect to be bumped around food sources, right? That's how they're created. They got this big old room, and I often try to share with people, and I usually get some odd faces, but a deer's number one predator defense mechanism is not its nose or its eyes or its ear, it's its belly. And the reason it's its belly, you've watched deer, especially in a heavy pressure area, they come out where there's some sun hitting the ground, they're getting native forbs or food plot or whatever, and they eat real quick, and then they go back in the bushes and they regurgitate it and chew it up more and swallow it again. If they had to eat like we do, they'd be standing out in that food plot for an hour and be much more exposed to predation.
Yeah.
So food is key to deer. They're going to need it every day. Deer are going to consume approximately, lots of variables in here, so don't send me hate mail, but about 5% of their body weight a day, dry weight. That's all the moisture. So you got lush clover, it could be 70% water. So now you're talking about eating a whole bunch of pounds every day to get that dry weight. So they're going to eat a lot, and that's going to be a daily routine. And if they're not coming in daylight, I still gain critical information of where they're coming from and where they're going. And by the way, if I could add, trail cameras are awesome. I'm a kind of a trail camera freak. I have too many. Don't tell my wife I admitted that, but
I won't.
If you go to the skin and shed, your buddy kills a deer, and no one likes to do this, right? Because you get your hands a little smelly, whatever. But after you're done eviscerating it, go up the esophagus. If it's a buck, pull it out. You don't want to ruin the cape or whatever. But because what you find is that your buddy harvested this deer at 8:45 in the morning. When you go up the esophagus, you're going to get a pretty good idea of where he was the previous hour because food moves a little bit slow. And you're going to say, oh, man, he's been around my neighbor's cornfield. There's some corn up there about 6 inches down from his throat, or, whatever it is. That's your timetable. We call that scouting from the skinning shed. And it's a little bit more accurate than looking in the rumen, because once food gets in the rumen, it can sit there quite a while. It does sit there quite a while. Of course, it'll start breaking down from the acids in there, but boy, when you get the esophagus, you can just backtrack a couple hundred yards and know exactly where that deer was.
That's a great idea. I like that a lot. So let's move the time forward on that scenario. You mentioned you'd be focusing on the food plots in the early season with this, 40 acres, 2 plots, 2 thickets, 1 ridge. Once we get a little later in the year, when would your trail camera placement shift, if at all, as you get later into the year?
Yeah, if I notice the browse pressure decreasing, I'm always going to have a utilization cage in all my plots for multiple reasons. But one is during hunting season, it's foot tall inside your basket and 8 inches tall outside. And then all of a sudden, there's only 2 inches difference. I know that the deer have left to go chase acorns or a local ag field or something, and I need to be hunting somewhere else. And so, or white oaks hit the ground, guys at my house or, neighbor's house, whatever, there's a big white oak out in the yard and it's just raining. And that's 5 minutes from where I hunt. I need to be chasing those white oaks. And I'm going to go to the ridge top. Now, deer are going to eat on the side ridges and the bottoms, but my chances of my wind staying in a constant direction is way higher on the ridge top. So I'm going to just get on that ridge top. Bucks love to cruise that ridge top because it's easier, less calories to cruise during the pre-rut and rut, and find me some great big old white oaks that are cruising up there. Now this is anything but scientific, but through the years, I've seemed to notice, it seems like on almost every property, unless it was clear cut 20 years ago or something, that there be that great big old tree that's twice as big as the other trees. Maybe there's a fence halfway going through it or whatever. They couldn't cut it. And it's almost like deer use those giant trees as road markers. Oh, we turn right up here at the big tree.
Yeah.
I know it sounds so, kind of quacky, but so many times when buddy, hey man, I know you're passing through. Why don't you come hunt with me one afternoon? And he doesn't have me a stand. Hey, we'll go. You got this ridge. Go down this ridge and hunt. And I don't have any clue what I'm doing. My default in that scenario is find the biggest tree on the ridge because I believe deer use that as a road mark.
I feel like anecdotally I've seen the same kind of thing too, and it fits in, it dovetails perfectly to my next question, and maybe your answer will apply to this too. But another situation similar to what you described that a lot of people dread is the banner acorn year. Like the year, let's say they're in like a big timber area, like you hunt, down there in southern Missouri, where there's acorns everywhere. Yeah. How do you narrow things down and approach your hunt when they can eat every darn place they turn?
Okay, so we got to think this through. There's acorns everywhere. That's not a limiting factor. You may know in the past that certain trees, for whatever reason, deer prefer the acorns there first over other trees. But what else is there? So if acorns aren't working for me because they're everywhere, is there a rub line? Is there a pinch point going in those acorns? Acorns are really dry. If you're eating a lot of acorns, they're going to water. That's a given. Acorns have low moisture content compared to lush clover or soybeans or something. So if they're really on acorns, people get all goofy about acorns, but what else they have to have every day? Well, they have to have water. So, is I still got you, Mark?
Yep, still got you.
Sorry.
No worries.
So water can be a big thing when deer are heavy on acorns. And water, unless you got a lake or a big creek or something, is going to usually be a more limited factor. And by the way, again, don't have data to prove this, but I've seen it a lot. Deer prefer drinking out of a little pond, a cow track, something small, than a big rushing river. And if you think about it, when they're by that big rushing river, they don't have near as good predator defense. That's making some noise. It kind of reduces their hearing potential. And, a predator could trap them against the water line, make them get in the water. So I love a little 10 or 20 foot pond for deer hunting.
Does your take on the big acorn year at all change from time of year? So like does water really play into it earlier in the year, but not so much during the rut? Or is like that kind of thing the same, you're going to run the same program in the heavy acorn years no matter what, which is find the limiting factor, in this case, maybe water or that pinch point, and play that one?
Yeah, pinch points are always awesome, but water, of course, during the ear season, you would expect it's hotter. And deer don't have sweat glands, they pant to get rid of water like a dog. So you're eating something really dry and it's hot and dry outside. Water just becomes even more valuable at that early season. And then a little later during the pre-rut, where the bucks aren't necessarily on a feeding pattern, they're eating, but they're, that first 5% of the does are receptive. So they're bouncing around trying to get that limited date. Again, they're moving a lot. They have to have water. They're like an athlete. They have to have water. So water, I think, is, especially in areas where water's a little more limited. I mean, water in South Florida is not a limiting factor. Don't try to hunt water. A, you'd probably get bit by a gator, and B, it's just everywhere. There's no pinch point there. But if you're in ridge and valley type stuff, there's not a creek in every valley. A little pond on a ridge top can be a great place to hunt during those times. The early season, it's hot, if it's hot and dry. And during the pre-rut, when deer are just running a lot, covering a lot more yards per day, and need some water.
Yeah. Speaking of it being hot, then let's consider a new scenario that's the opposite of that. So let's say it's October 15th, mid-October, and the first big cold front of the year hits. It's dropping, 25 degrees cooler than it was on the previous day's high. And you have some weird scheduling things though going on, and you are only available to hunt the next morning after the cold front hits, or that evening. So you can hunt the next day after the cold front. It's either the morning or the evening. You can only pick one. Which of those sits would you choose to hunt? Why is that? And then, paint for me your perfect spot for that kind of hunt on that kind of day.
I'm going to throw in just a couple more variables. It's almost always easier for hunters to move into position in the afternoon when we would think deer are bedded up. Yeah, I love morning hunting, but unless you've got that special stand, what I call a backdoor stand, where the deer out in the bean field and you're coming in a totally opposite direction and the wind's right and you just let them come to you. Afternoon hunts are easier for hunters to get in position. So I'm going to weigh that in. If everything's equal, I'm going with the afternoon hunt. I love hunting the day after a front goes through. And if that front passed midday and I can hunt in the afternoon, that would be awesome. But weighing those odds of the first one, I might fudge a little bit toward the afternoon hunt.
Okay.
By the way, I like about a 10% or more greater temperature change. A lot of people get hung up on the actual degrees, but 10 degrees between 70 and 80 and 10 degrees between 20 and 30, there's a whole big difference there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking for percent change, and I really like days that are 10% or more change. That's favorable. So if it's warm in the fall and it's cooler, 10% cooler, I really like that. If it's been wicked cold and the first day it warms up 10%, deer are going to be everywhere. They're going to be feeding. So I look at it as percent change versus an actual number. And I like right after the front is passed, if I can approach hunt next without alerting deer.
Okay. I love it. So that first evening then is your chance. You've got the nice temperature drop. Can you paint for me a picture of what that location would be? Let's say on your home farm. Can you imagine what your, all other things being equal with obviously we have no MRI, but if you could imagine a perfect situation for October 15th, you're waiting for the afternoon hunt, what kind of spot would be perfect for that day in your mind?
Yeah, if we have a white oak crop, they're going to white oaks here in most places, and we have white oaks, but we have probably 80% red oaks. So our white oaks are kind of pinch points, if you will. And so I'm probably going to be in white oaks, big mature white oaks, and I'm going to be on a ridge top. Not the deer again aren't eating on slopes, but my wind is going to the wind direction is going to stay much more consistent on a ridge top. And I kind of explain that if you're a trout fisherman, ever fished a good trout stream, there's eddies everywhere because it's hitting a rock or cutting a bank or whatever. And then if you go to the big metro area and they got these concrete ditches for flood control, there's no eddies out there because the water's not hitting anything. And so that's so true for air movement. So I love hunting western Kansas. I look like a really good hunter in western Kansas because the wind comes off the Rockies today. It did yesterday. It did 100 years ago, and it's going to do it the next 100 years. So the wind direction is pretty doggone consistent unless there's a big front or storm going on. And it comes off those Rockies and just sweeps across that flat prairie out there.
Yeah.
And so the wind direction, and everything's in section lines, so you can almost always get east of it. Wind's going to be out of west, something west, and get to your stand. And the same thing is true if you own the property or it's your grandma's property or whatever, and you've done some habitat work and you have done TSI, timber stand improvement, or you took out a bunch of lower quality trees and left the best. There's fewer eddies out there. There's more room for the wind to build up speed going tree to tree. When you're hunting in closed canopy, thick forest, there's going to be eddies everywhere, and it's really tough not to get busted.
Yeah, so true. I've been there. Would your answer to that question on choosing the morning or the evening, my original question, would that change if I fast forwarded the date from October 15th up to November 15th, or would you still pick that evening?
No, in November, I'd probably have to skip work, get in trouble, and hunt both times. To be honest, you got to be out there. But I love mornings in November. I'm a morning person. I'm a morning hunter. But that time of year, I feel we can get away with more entering our stand because the bucks are not on a pattern. They're looking for a date, and they're not on a pattern, or rarely are they on a pattern. And so I'll risk more getting closer to bedding areas or whatever, take a more direct route, because the buck is liable to come from about anywhere unless you got a really great pinch point. It just narrows down, a river narrows you down, whatever. And I'm going to be hunting mornings that time of year, and evenings if I can, but if only one in the morning.
Yeah, I like your idea. Just paying the consequences, skipping work and making it happen. I got another one here that's a little bit of a downer, another downer here for you. But let's say you hunted your evening of October 15th, and let's say it worked out great. You picked that perfect spot, and the buck comes in, and you get a shot at the deer. In your mind's eye, when you think back on this shot, now let's say you're not filming, so you can't actually look at the film, but in your mind's eye, you're thinking, man, I think it hit lungs, maybe like back of the lungs, and you decide to get on the blood trail within an hour and a half, something like that. And the trail isn't as good as you were hoping for. It's kind of spotty, and it takes you, past 200 yards. You're still on blood, but it's spotty, and you have not found him now. After about 200, 250 yards, it's been, 2 hours probably now since the shot. What would you do in that specific scenario? You think it's back of lungs, 200 plus yard kind of spotty blood trail. Do you keep pushing a deer like that? Do you stop? And let's say this was an evening hunt, right? So it's after dark now. How would you handle this specific tracking scenario?
Yeah, and unless there is a big rain front moving in, I'm backing out. October 15th, most of the whitetails range. It's cool enough. Meat can take an awful lot without spoiling, way more than I think most hunters realize. And I'm just backing out. I might have been tempted to back out at 100 yards. Now, I'm going to try, if I recover the arrow, to really study, smell, touch, how sticky is the blood, of course, what color it is. I'm trying to gain as much intel from the arrow and the spore on the ground as I can before I ever get 200 yards down the trail. But if I'm 200 yards and the blood trail's not changing, it's just drip, 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 I'm backing out for sure.
Yeah. And back out all the way till the next morning? Is that right?
Yeah, I'll be there at sunrise. By the next morning, not 100% of the time, but the odds are really great. The deer has either passed or is going to survive, or is going to survive for 5 or 6 days until infection sets in.
Yeah. Well, I hope in that scenario when you wait the next morning he's right there and you got him. But we're gonna pretend like you didn't, and we're gonna pretend that it is now the 3rd week of October, and you're hunting again. And here's a scenario that I've actually been in myself. This is pulled right out of my own history, and it's one I've had different. I think a lot of us have had something similar to this. You're hunting this buck. You've gotten daylight trail camera pictures of him a handful of evenings in daylight in a small hidey hole food plot. You have hunted that spot 2 times in the month of October so far. So over the last 21 days, you've went in twice after him. It's like you get a daylight picture, maybe on your cell camera, and you think, all right, I got the same conditions. I go back in the next night, he's a no-show. And then it happens again like a week later. You get the daylight picture of him on food. You try to hunt him there again the next night. He's a no-show. Each time you've done it, the same thing has happened. What do you do in that scenario if you're trying to get that buck? It's now 3rd week of October. You've had this thing happen a couple times. What, if anything, would you do to try to fine-tune moving in towards the pre-rut into the rut?
Yeah, probably going to go back to an early conversation and reposition a few cameras in the area and not intrude too much, but try to pick up some more intel. And I would really consider my approach. Is this buck really that random? And it may be because my trail cameras are getting pictured once a week, and those are the toughest bucks to hunt. Or am I alerting this deer somehow getting there?
Mm-hmm.
And often we think, well, the trail camera picture shows him coming from pick a direction west. He's bedded way down that holler somewhere. But many, many times deer have a very circuitous or curvy route getting to where they're going to feed or wherever they're going. And heck, he may be walking 30 yards from where I'm parking my vehicle or walking in or whatever. And so I never count on unless I really know my habitat and I've maintained my habitat. I've done a lot of improvements and I've kind of planned how deer are going to travel. We really never know how deer are getting there based on a still picture. I would add this though. I have no problem hunting the same stand for many days in a row if I'm very convinced I have not alerted deer. If you're not alerting deer, it doesn't matter. People always ask me, hey, can you hunt that stand more than one day? Can you hunt it 2 days? You can hunt it 100 days if you're not alerting deer. May not be a good choice to hunt it that many days, but it's all about alerting deer. Like I have a buddy here who lives close by me and good mountain hunter, and he missed, the buck of a lifetime here in the Ozarks with a bow at 20 yards out of a big oak tree, and buck heard the arrow hit the ground and, ran off. He's just sick. Calls me up, just sick. I said, man, that deer just heard some noise. I'd go back. If the wind's the same tomorrow, I'd go back there, no problem. If he did not look at you, see you, act like he smelled you, he just heard some noise. And he probably does not associate that with human danger.
A similar kind of offshoot of that. We talked earlier about how we both prefer, wheeled access or exit.
Mm-hmm.
What about that kind of situation, like hunting the same place and every night to get out of there, you get picked up? Do you feel like it eventually has some kind of accrual of negativity where, you hunt that stand 6 times in November throughout October and you get picked up every night? Is eventually that going to start to kind of wear on things, or are you feel like that's pretty bulletproof and you can get away with that over and over as long as the other things you mentioned are true?
Yeah, as long as the other factors come into play, I don't worry about it. I think about golf courses or going down, any city highway, St. Louis River, Atlanta. Deer are really conditioned to those things as long as they don't associate them with danger. Like there's some great research where everyone sees people hunting over feeder in South Texas, and $20 pile in, 17,000 does it seems like or whatever, and day after day. Well, that's limited hunting pressure on those big ranches. If you go to the deep south where hunting is, like going to school, you just do it every day. Those feeders get so much pressure, deer become extremely nocturnal at feeders, and you'd be much better to hunt somewhere else. So it's got you need to take all these, I guess, in context a little bit. And my big thing is to try to not alert deer, because I think we'd all rather hunt a golf course deer than the middle of a public land deer, where the deer just kind of stand there and look at you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to, and golf courses they got herbicide and fungicide and insecticide and mowing and people and golf carts. Old lady hoolaying in the bushes looking for a golf ball, and the deer don't care. They just stand around, right? Because there's no perceived danger. Or my favorite one is, I used to do quite a bit of work for DOD, Department of Defense. They have to spend about 10% of their budget on environment or wildlife, whatever. And many times I've seen, 150, 200 of America's best stand there practicing with automatic weapons, and 20 deer feeding on the downwind side. There's 2 major lessons there. The deer are totally conditioned to it. Of course, our best are not shooting at them because they'd probably, have to go to the brig or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're always going to be on the predominant downwind side because gunpowder is a high percent nitrogen. That's probably the most fertilized place on the base where all those gunshots are going on. Where it's blowing that gun smoke. And they will be, or trap ranges or anything else. You'll see a ton of deer on big shooting ranges usually because it's super fertilized with nitrogen.
Interesting. Very interesting. I want to take one step back to the original question, that food plot where you're getting the daylight pictures, but then every time you go in there the next day, he's not there, even though he was daylight the day before. And you mentioned, you should do a little bit of, kind of assess your access and think about, am I blowing him out? Am I alerting him some way? I've sometimes thought about that and just not known. And I've been, man, I don't know. I don't know if I am. I don't think I am. But I've sometimes thought, I'm just going to throw a curveball. I'm just going to take a completely different route than I ever have. And it may be way longer, way more pain in the butt. Maybe it'll hurt me in other ways. But I have sometimes thought like, hey, just try something completely different than you always do, because something's not quite working in that way. Do you ever consider that? Do you ever do something like that?
I do, but I will admit it's usually out of frustration and often not the best choice. I mean, if you've got a planned route and you're pretty confident it's not alerting deer, your buddy's dropping you off, or you're walking down the road or whatever, versus going through the bushes and brush and making a lot of noise and leaving a lot of scent on stuff you're wiping on and getting there, it's probably not the best. I'm not saying it hasn't worked for people, but probably not the best idea.
Yeah.
I would probably be more likely to, if I had an extra stand, I need to pull that stand, just moving. If I have truck camera pictures and the buck again always comes in from the west, I'm gonna move down in the timber 50 yards and see if he's staging out there out of view of me.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Speaking of bucks kind of out of range, but maybe in view, I've got another scenario here that speaks to, or that, I think we can speak to what to do in a situation where there's that buck that's out of range. Let's say, continuing down the calendar, late October, we're sitting in a tree stand somewhere and we see a mature buck that you're interested in shooting, but he's about 100 yards away. And he is on a path that if he were to continue about another 100 yards, he'll eventually pass through your wind. So in this scenario, late October, 100-yard away shooter buck, but heading towards your wind eventually, what's your go-to move? Are you going to aggressively call? Are you going to not call at all because you're worried he'll eventually circle downwind? What's your take? How do you handle that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. And one of the most important things about calling or grunting is considering the wind and the buck's likely path. I think that's more important than the actual call you're using. So if he's 100 yards from hitting my wind, I'm probably going to grunt because I'm going to gamble. He's going to turn. He's not coming straight to me, but he's going to turn and get shooting range before he cuts my wind. If he's 30 yards from hitting my wind, his arc is probably going to take him into my wind. And I'm not going to let him pinpoint me by calling. I'm just going to let him hit my wind and wish he had.
Yeah.
So I use a grunt call a lot. It's one of my favorite tools. I don't blind grunt much because unless I'm just in a stand where, my back's to a river or highway or something, and they're just not getting behind me very likely. Blind calling, I had a really good friend, still have a really good friend, Mickey Hellickson, did a bunch of work with Jeep or radio callers and rattling on a large ranch in Texas, really high dollar research when we both were in grad school many years ago. And I don't remember exact numbers, just like 30 years ago, but I think as many bucks circle around him, they would have observers up in these 30-foot tall stands, and he'd be on the ground rattling. And he only saw, like, I don't remember, 30, 40, 50% of the bucks because the rest come in from behind him and win at him. So, but the bucks he saw were bucks he happened to see out in front of him with a positive wind and rattled, and they did come in, and he saw them. So I'm real selective when I use my grunt, but I have no problem throwing it out there as long as I think the buck's natural path is going to get to me, or at least in shot range, before he cuts my wind.
Yeah. Is there, and I know you probably don't have a hard line, but is there any kind of, if you had to put a number on it, about what distance is it that buck needs to be away from hitting your wind where you'll feel comfortable? You mentioned that 30 yards would be too close, but is there a maximum? Like, is it 60? Is it 50? What would that number be?
I don't know. I think it kind of depends on the lay of the land. You can kind of look out there and envision where's a buck most likely to travel. Is there a bunch of rocks or a fence or something that's going to turn him towards you a little sooner? I think that's side by side. I will tell you one time, I was hunting on a property where we really needed to remove a lot of females, and a female 6-month-old deer come in, and landlord just said, "Hey, Grant, you can shoot any buck you want, but I really need you shooting every doe you can." In the States, really liberal seasons. And so sure enough, 30, 40 minutes before dark, this young of the year female comes in and gets about 7 yards away. And I said, well, it's what my host told me to do. So I launch an arrow, and it dies 7 yards behind me. And like, okay, one tag down. Think about it. And it's just, it's prime. Now we're 20 minutes from dark and food plot behind me, acorns in front of me. It's a good setup. Sitting there. And sure enough, I look over and a very mature deer is easing up the ridge. He's down there about 80 yards. And he's kind of coming a direction that's going to bring him behind me to that fawn instead of in my shooting lane. And I'm going, oh my goodness, this is horrible. I mean, it's a 4-day hunt. Here comes a nice buck. But it looks like he's going to miss my shooting lane and go to that fawn. And that's exactly what happens. And it's important to remember, deer do not associate dead animals laying around like we might associate finding a dead person in the woods while we're hunting or something at all. So he walks up, and this is way pre-rut, real early season. I can't get a shot through the back of the tree brush. I didn't trim any limbs out the back. And he's smelling the fawn and, doing the normal buck thing. And like, oh my gosh, this is just, so close, but so far away. And then he walked over and smelled my arrow, which he wasn't expecting. And that kind of alerted him a little bit. And he kind of just started cutting a half circle. And when that half circle hit my range, I poked one through the boiler room. So in that particular case, being patient worked. But I didn't grunt because I thought the grunt was out of season, it was early season, and the smell of that female on the ground was too much of a combination.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it just worked out right. And by the way, I'd like to share here that about 25% of the mature bucks I've tagged since I've been old enough to keep records have been tagged out of that same stand or blind that I had already harvested a doe that hunt. Not a week before, not the day before, that same hunt, like an hour before, 30 minutes before. And I've never had a big buck come in and bust out of there because there was a dead doe laying on the ground. I just hope if I'm firearm hunting, I double shoulder shoot and try to drop him right there within range. I don't want him running over the hill. And in my mind, that is the best attractant I've ever used, was a doe harvested during that same hunt.
Do you ever get them? I guess that example you just shared. Have you ever had other situations where the buck smells that doe and comes right into range to that spot and stops?
Oh, many times. We have many episodes showing that.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like every year here, one of me or one of my guests, whatever, has that scenario right here on the proving grounds every year, because we try to harvest a lot of does, and my neighbors try to harvest a lot of bucks. You kind of find that balance in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's happened to my daughters and Daniel and myself multiple times, and these tend to be often pretty mature bucks, and they're walked right in there, especially during the rut. Missouri's firearm season's during the rut, and they're poke their antlers at her and try to get her to stand up. They do not associate death like we do. I find a dead human out there in the timber, I'm freaking out and, calling the cops or something. But deer just do not have that response at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good reminder. What about this one? This is kind of a different iteration of that shot example I mentioned earlier. I talked about you get the shot, not necessarily as great of a hit as you wanted, yada, yada, yada. What about a situation, we'll say it's early November, it's a morning hunt, you get a shot of deer and you just miss completely. You blank on this buck, the buck runs off. What do you do in the hours following that? Let's say the miss is like 9 a.m. What do you do from 9 a.m. through the rest of that day? Do you just keep on hunting, or do you back out and go home and shoot? Do you do anything to check what's going on? What would you be thinking about or considering or doing after a miss like that on the 9 a.m. early November?
Yeah, so I think most of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we know we shut our eyes or punched the trigger or, we did something. And in the heat of the battle, it's a little tougher to sort that out. But if I whiffed a shot, I missed. I'm to blame, not the bow, not the side. I missed. I'm right there in the tree. And I do a lot of talking to myself about my confidence, because my confidence is the worst part of my shooting skill at that time. If I turn around to the cameraman or just think to myself, man, the pin was solid, it was just sitting there, how did I miss that thing? Then I'm probably getting down and probably what I would do, I tend to have a squirrel. I'm a hillbilly, so I tend to have a squirrel arrow in my quiver. I don't know if you know what a squirrel arrow is. It's something you care if you bust in a stump or something. But it's going to be tuned. I take tuning very serious, and it's going to fly like my broadheads. And I'm going to back out or shoot it right from the tree there. I'm going to find a rotten stump or something, and I'm going to whip it. And if I hit, then I go, well, I did just miss. And if I also miss a foot or two or 10 feet or whatever it was, then I'm going home and tuning.
What about that self-talk? You mentioned, like, if your confidence is shot, you're going to kind of talk to yourself. Like, what goes on in the head of Grant Woods after a whiff? How do you psych yourself up? How do you shake yourself out of it? What does that look like?
Mark, I'm 61, and I've had 2 kidney transplants. I'm in great health, as you know, but I'm too old and had laid there in the bed too many times waiting for it to go beep the next time to make excuses in my life anymore. So for me personally, I'm going to own my errors. That's just something I live by. And so I'm going to admit, and usually I whiffed it. As a bow hunter, here's my thing. I have pretty good form after all these years, and I shoot decent. I can make it happen. When I err, I shut my eyes. Target panic. After all these years, It doesn't matter if I'm shooting at a target or a deer or a hog or whatever. When I miss, it's like 99.9. It's never the bow's fault almost, because I don't have my bow tuned. I'm gonna know my equipment. I shut my eyes, and it's amazing how far that pin can move between when you tell your brain release and when you actually release if you shut your eyes. So for me, just personally me, Again, I'm going to whip the squirrel arrow, and I'm going to tell myself, you keep your eyes open. If some people tape on their bow, pick a spot, or some of those saying like that. Mine is keep your eyes open. And if I keep my eyes open, it's probably going to work out just fine. I mean, you always, you could drop your bow, booger up your sights, but if I drop my bow, heaven forbid, going into a stand, I'm going to shoot with my phone light or something before I ever get up in that stand. I'm not going to sit there and worry all morning because I'm not going to be a good hunter.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been through those situations myself too. And yeah, it's no fun, but you just got to push through it and own it and get better, right?
I think for all of us, this is maybe a little off target here, no pun intended, but if we own our mistakes, life just goes a lot easier.
So true. One of the most important things I feel like my dad ever taught me was just accept responsibility for stuff. There's no better way to deal with something than accept it, take responsibility, and do something about it.
I'm on your dime here, but I'm gonna take this one step further.
Please do.
I have a counselor, not a counselor, but a wise person that teaches me a lot. And his statement is your lack of responsibility becomes someone else's responsibility. And I think when it's framed like that, at least to me, I'm going to be better at accepting my own responsibility.
Yeah. Out of almost the guilt of forcing that obligation on someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take a simple thing. Okay, my wife's been taking care of her dad, and I leave a mess in the sink, and she's had a long day, and she comes home, she's got to clean it up. That's way off subject, but heck yeah, take 5 minutes, clean it up, take care of your own responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, we'd be all be in a much better place, I think, if we could always live that way, right? It's one of those sometimes easier said than done things, but man.
Absolutely.
A lot of truth to that. Okay, I got a few more of these for you, Grant, and then I'll let you off the hook. Let's talk through one thing that happens every, 3, 4, 5 years, it seems, across the country, and people always bemoan it, which is we get to, the peak of when it's supposed to be the best part of the hunting season, that first week or two of November. Let's say for this scenario, we'll say November 7th, right? And a lot of people like to say that's maybe the best day of the year.
Sure, I've heard it a lot, yeah.
Yeah, but here's the catch. Conditions are poor. We've got the hot, muggy, nasty November that when people get it, they're just so bummed because they've sunk their week of vacation time into it. Let's say November 7th through the 12th or 13th is going to be in the, whatever it is for your area. Let's say it's going to be in the 60s or 70s, which is too hot. Will you dramatically change the way you hunt that week out of the usual because of the temperatures? Or are you going to hunt in your usual primo rut spots despite it?
No, I probably will. And it's not that the deer aren't moving. I was involved in a research project many years ago, university stuff, and several of us researchers around America put together about 14,000 fetal dates. So humans go to the doctor and they take an ultrasound and measure crown to rump of the fetus and tell you your baby's going to be born X. You can also backdate to the point of conception. And so for deer, we really know when they breed in most areas. Some states don't take very specific data, but that's not a mystery. You don't have to print a new calendar every year. We know what's going on. And so you're going to know the peak or the range or whatever. But if it's just really hot and, deer got fat on and they're in really good shape, no one likes running a sprint when there's, got a big down coat on. So they're probably going to move a little bit more at night, but they're still moving. It's the prom. You're going to the prom. But I'm going to hunt areas where, because it's warm and muggy, my scent's going to be really tough to control. And maybe on cold days, I got some areas where the thermals are sinking down and I can slide in there in the cold morning and do good. I'm going to avoid those areas. My number one thing year round or during hunting season is not to alert deer, because there's almost always another day, right? Unless it's the last day of season, there's another day. But if you alert a deer and booger up his pattern for a week or two, it's really tough hunting. So I'm going to hunt that week, that time. I'm in the Midwest also. So, Halloween to November 15th, I'm going to be out there somewhere. And the conditions are rough. I'm still going to be out there, but I'm going to be really picky about where I put my stand so deer can get within range.
Are there any other types of areas that you would think would be more attractive at that time of year? Like, I mean, some people would say hunt more towards water on those hotter rut days. Anything like
Yeah,
that?
yeah, I think there's goody that. I mean, I like to put all the odds in my favor. So water in a bottleneck that's just uh, downwind of a bedding area. So a buck's cruising through there looking for a receptive doe, and he can get a drink along the way. I'm going to put two or three things together, not just one thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't remember who said this, but I remember hearing from someone once where they said that they will never sit a stand or a tree or blind or anything unless there's three really, really good reasons to be there. There's got to be at least three travel corridors or three, motivations for a deer to be in that exact spot. And that's always helped me really fine tune things. It shouldn't be just like, oh, there's one trail. It's got to be this and this and this all lined up right.
And so there's so many more factors. Like, you're in southern Iowa and there's food everywhere early season. Food may not be the big play, right? And you're in the Smoky Mountains and there's not much food anywhere. Food's a huge play on the exact same day, same conditions. So we really need to do some consideration of multiple factors when we opt how we're going to hunt and the techniques we're going to use that day.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. I want to ask you about something that once caused you to get hate mail, from what I hear. Let's say you're out. It's later in the year now. It's gun season, which in Missouri, that opens somewhere in mid-November, right?
Yeah, mid-November to Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's gun season, and you're hunting a spot. It's kind of you can see down to a brushy kind of opening, and your big shooter buck you've been after steps out in that brush stuff. And it's a mixture of grass and some woody, browsy kind of stuff. That buck is within shooting range. He's stopped. He's broadside, but his vitals are covered with some of that grass and brush. You can see through it. You can even see his shoulder, but there is stuff in and around it. And you would have to punch through some of that grass, some of that brush with your firearm. Would you take that shot? And why or why not?
Yeah, so I did have that exact scenario, as you know, and I did not. And man, I got loaded up with hate mail. Holy mackerel. I didn't know there was that many ways to call a biologist stupid, to tell you the truth. But here's the thing. We used to teach some deer hunting schools, and we would take, and this isn't exactly like grass, but it's pretty doggone close. We would take 1/8-inch dowel rods, so real flimsy dowel rods, little wooden rods, and drill holes and 2x4s and just stack these little dowel rods in there. So a 30 caliber bullet just couldn't get, you either hit it in the middle because I'm not that great a shot, or hit it on the edge. You were not passing a bullet through 2 feet of these dowel rods without hitting one. You may barely wing it, you may center punch it, and we put it out there at 100 yards. And then we put great big old targets, moving paper actually, at 1 meter and 3 meters, or 1 yard and 3 yards behind it. And at 1 yard behind it, we'd usually hit the paper, but not where we were aiming. You hit the deer in the butt or the nose or something like that. Go above him, blow him. At 3 meters, we usually didn't cut paper. That bullet was turning sideways so fast.
Wow.
223, 308, 30-06. So a lot of that hate mail had to do with I was using a 308, and a lot of words with a few adjectives not included was, you're not shooting a bow, shoot through the grass. You're not shooting a BB gun, shoot through the grass.
Mm-hmm.
If the 308 won't do it, take you a 300 Win Mag. And I would say, I only weigh 170 pounds. I'm not shooting a 300 Win Mag at a whitetail deer.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, bullets are, pick a number. They're moving 2,000 to 3,000 feet a second, depending on how you're loaded, what you're shooting. And you think about anything moving that fast, it doesn't have to hit hardly anything to change its course. And a bullet is a long cylindrical shape. So if it just gets just ever so slightly out of straight towards the target, all of a sudden it's creating an eddy. It gets a lot of wind on one side, the direction it's going, and it's creating an eddy on the offside. Like if you have a canoe, if you're a fisherman or a kayak or whatever, and you want to cross a pretty fast stream, just go straight across it. You put your canoe or kayak in there at 45 degrees, you don't have to paddle. It'll just shoot you straight across because it's pushing on one side and making the eddy on the other, and it'll just take you straight across. Well, that's exactly what happens with a bullet, quickly, within inches. So I passed that deer. I ended up harvesting him last year, years later, with a bow, which was much more thrilling because he was so old. He had a smaller rack, but gosh, I'd chased that deer for many, many years. And for me, and just the responsibility I personally accept as a hunter, I'm not going to risk wounding the deer versus harvesting the deer. So I did give that deer a pass.
Yeah.
And I hope I would do the same thing again,
Yeah.
with no matter what caliber I'm shooting. And I just realized through personal experience and through talking with engineers at various ammo plants that bullets deflect easily. There's not really a brush gun. It's not like, well, I got daddy's old 45-70 here. I just shoot through whatever, I hear the story all the time. I got this email a bunch. Well, I've shot through a bunch of 3-inch saplings and killed deer. I'm like, man, you can't keep from hitting a 3-inch sapling. You better go to the range some more.
Yeah.
But anyway, for me and my level of respect for the critters, what I want to do in life, I'm not going to take that shot.
Yeah. I think very often the best shot taken is none. And respect you a lot for doing that. It's always one of those things that's easier said than done. And in that moment when something you want so badly is right there, it's really hard to have that self-control. But you're right. You can't ever get a bullet back, and you don't want it to go south. So
yeah, and when I was younger, I took some iffy shots and didn't recover deer. So I've learned that lesson. I am not perfect. And when I was young, I was like every other hillbilly in the Ozarks. I had my lever action 30-30, thinking we were going to do a man drive on national forest when there was no breaks, no openings, no nothing. That's just how we hunted. And so I've had the advantage of learning some of those lessons through time, and the victory, the glory of the victory to me is not equal to the pain of defeat. So I just don't want to wound an animal if I can avoid it. If I can put the odds in my favor to avoid it.
Yep. So true. All right. This one's not really a hypothetical scenario, but I got to ask you about it anyways because it's so intriguing to me. I've heard you talk about hunting like a bobcat.
Yeah.
Could you explain to me what you mean by that? What does it mean to hunt like a bobcat? How do you do that? And what's the situation when you would actually take that approach?
Love hunting like a bobcat. So bobcats, they may have a den. They don't go to the same den every day, or usually don't. They got 2 or 3 places, depending on wind direction or coyotes in the area, whatever. But you get them on your trail. If you're in bobcat country, you get pictures of bobcats just walking logging roads all the time. They're just moving down the road. And then when they get in their hunting areas, not one area, bobcats, based on GPS collars and whatnot, tend to hunt here today and there tomorrow. It's like they know, well, I've been through there. I spooked a game. I need to hunt a different area the next day. And I'm not saying that's what they do, but that's what the data seems to show. And so they're just cruising until they get to their hunting place. And then when they're hunting, most hunters have seen this in the standard blind. Man, it's not take 10 steps to the next tree and stop. It's step, stop, set down, look, stop. They spend more time still than they do moving. So we call it spot and stalk, but bobcat hunting is actually stalking, trying to spot. We're stalking, trying to spot. And with a bow, it's a real thrill. When you walk up within 30 yards of a bedded deer or feeding deer, my goodness, you just add about 150 inches to that rack because it's going to be an awesome experience. I mean, that 100-inch deer comes to 250 every day of the month. And I love doing this in habitat that's quiet enough to let you do it. I mean, a bone dry day in October with 6 inches of oak leaves, you're not going to do it very well with a bow. But get some moisture, or down south, they thin about every 5th row of pines very commonly. And I love getting on the end of that pine stand where the wind's in my face and just creeping up and barely peeking around the corner. And, maybe you see a deer too far, deer you don't want to harvest, and you slide through there and go to the next row, and you finally find a deer you want to harvest. Then you back up 1 row and, cut that distance, and then just barely quietly stalk within range. That's just a thrilling, for me, way to hunt. Just thrilling. You're not sitting still. You're not looking at your phone. You're kind of, you're predator mode every second. And many years ago, I was hunting with a buddy on public land in western Kansas. One of the first years they allowed non-resident hunters to hunt out there. And we were just sitting in a big old public area of native grass. It was too tall for me to see over it setting down. I remember this clearly. And I'm kind of a tall guy, and I stood out like a sore thumb if I stood up. So I was crouching all morning. It's very uncomfortable, crouching, looking, crouching, looking. And about 9:30 or so, there was some ag fields down the bottom and this public land on top. And we saw this, to me, really good 11-point buck, just giant shoulders, end up weighing about 300 pounds, come up in this CRP and bed down. And in CRP, it wasn't like there's a tree or a landmark. He just beds down about 600 yards away. We're looking across the valley. We were hunting for this purpose, sitting on the one side, looking into the other side. And we're like, oh my gosh, it really happened. And so we're all excited, and we can't go straight to him. So we drive around a section line, get the wind right, and you can't see anything. I mean, the bedded buck and 5-foot tall switchgrass, you can't see anything. So we're crawling and peeking over and looking. And about 80 yards out, my buddy sees something not moving, and it ended up being a tine of this buck. And we crawl on up there, and we get up there. This is such a cool hunt. Get about, 15, 20 yards away. I happen to be hunting with a recurve at the time, and spot a cock pheasant between us and the buck. We're afraid to flush that pheasant, so we just lay there till he feeds on through. My buddy stays back, and I'm, elbows and knees, barely pushing my bow in front of me. And he's laying, and this is so typical for big bucks, right below an old terrace. This used to be an ag field years ago and highly erosion-prone soil, so there's a big terrace. And he's laying right below it, and I get to the top side. And this is a large deer. And I'm just like, for 3 minutes, I'm just in awe. I've never been that close to a wild, free-ranging big buck. I'm sure my buddy's thinking, what is wrong with Woods? Why hasn't he shot? And finally, I realized I was hunting with a 60-inch Black Widow recurve. And when I'm laying on the ground, I can't pull the thing back, right? I mean, it's just too much grass in the way and stuff. So he's awake. He's kind of like they do, head up, chewing his cud. And he's got this hill to his back, and he's just moving his head about 30 degrees, watching the front. And finally, I just said, okay, when he gets to the farthest one side, starts swinging back, I'm going to stand up and shoot in one motion. Of course, with a recurve, I'm an instinctive shooter. You just pull it back and launch, right? And so that's what I did. And I pegged this big old buck, and it was such a super high stimulation hunt that's when I started trying to hunt like a bobcat. And again, if I don't think there's any deer in the area, I'm getting to where there's some deer in the area, and I'm slowing way down, and I do more looking than I do walking. And if the wind changes, I change my direction. I got my little puffer bottle or whatever, throwing leaves, whatever. I just keep the wind in my face. And maybe a big acorn flat. And I think deer pass through here about 8:39 in the morning feeding acorns, but I can't figure out what street they're going through. I love hunting like a bobcat. And even with the bow, folks, if you can shoot 30 yards, and I would say the number one thing is wind direction. Number two thing is patience. All my buddies want to go too fast. Well, Grant, I don't see any deer in 100 yards ahead of us. Let's just walk the next 100 yards. We're making so much noise. I mean, I'm going step at a time. And I actually see as many deer to my side as I do in front of me. They'll just come into your side, and you just get a tree between you and them and let them walk by you.
Yeah, I can see the appeal. I've gotten more and more willing to try things on the ground like that, and it continues to prove to be a lot of fun and surprisingly effective. So I love it.
So few people hunt like that anymore. It's almost like their guard is down on that, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I really enjoy it. I highly recommend if anyone to at least give it a try just once and see if you don't really like it.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Grant, I got a final set of rapid fire questions. Just looking for like a one word or couple word answer. We'll bounce through these really quick, and then you will have made it through the gauntlet. Okay, so here's the final rundown. You ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Does the moon matter to deer movement? Yes or no?
No.
Would you take a 50-yard shot at a whitetail with your bow?
No.
If you could only have one of these tools for the rest of your hunts, for the rest of your life, would you select rattling antlers or grunt tube?
Grunt tube.
Expandable or fixed blade broadheads?
I'll go with what I currently use, fixed blade.
Okay. Should you stop a moving buck with some kind of sound before shooting with a bow?
Yes.
Which state has better hunters, Missouri or Georgia?
Oh, Lord.
I'm going to get you
I
more
can
hay
only get
mail.
one word. I'm going to say individual.
All right, here's the last thing. Let's imagine for a second that I have control of the world. I rule the world. I have a magic wand, and I am going to revoke your hunting privileges, Grant, for the next 20 years, unless you kill a mature buck in one single day this coming season. So you get one day. I need you to pick the date on the calendar. What day are you going to pick for this hunt? And then please give me details of the one specific location that you're going to pick for this very high stakes hunt.
November 5th, western Kansas, where it's wide open and the travel corridors are probably obvious from Mars.
Love it. Love it. What kind of like paint for me like the tree stand location more detailed?
Might be a ground blind. There's not a lot of trees in western Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm going to want three things. I'm going to want a couple trails merging into maybe a fence gap. And typically my hunts out there will have a CRP field that I think deer are bedding in, and a bean or alfalfa field where I think they're feeding. And I'm going to be in between in the smallest gap I can find on the satellite image. I'm not going to walk. Typically, this is a creek bottom. I'm not going to walk the whole thing. I'm going to find the narrowest gap so the buck is unlikely to pass out a range that's also favorable for the wind. And I love those western creek bottoms because they tend to not be straight but wind a lot. So somewhere in that bottom, the wind's going to be perfect for the wind that day.
Yep. Man, that sounds like a good spot. I have confidence in your choice. I think you'll get it done. Grant, that is it. That is the what would you do gauntlet. You passed with flying colors.
Oh, you're kind. You're kind. Thank you for being patient with my rambling.
Oh, no, I thoroughly enjoyed it. For folks that want to follow along with all the cool stuff you're doing, can you fill us in on anything new to look forward to this fall, or where we should go to see all your great content?
Mark, how about I share some with you I haven't shared with the rest of the public? So
Sure.
My wife Trace and I have been very blessed, and through the years, not all at once, through 20 plus years, we've accumulated a pretty big piece of land here in the Ozark Mountains, all timbered, rough, steep, rocky. This is not, high dollar Iowa land. And we have sold the northern 1,500 acres to close here in about a couple of weeks, where I've spent the vast majority of 20 years working.
Wow.
And are moving our office. You've been here, Mark, and our house, all our trail cameras, all our hunting equipment to this southern 900 acres where there's nothing. Just a couple little food plots, not all the TSI, not all the burning, because I love a new project. And, I mentioned I'm 61. I got another good project or two in me, I believe, Lord willing. And so I'm really excited about starting over and sharing because the techniques I used 15 years ago, I may not use anymore. I've refined, or I've learned a quicker way or a cheaper way or whatever. So I am so excited to start over. And I will tell you, and you get this because you're a producer, you don't do something that significant just to get new content. You don't. This is my true heart to really refine. My northern property is not perfect, but we're in the Ozarks and we harvest doggone large bucks for the Ozarks, and we figured out how to hunt it, and we kind of know the situation. And I'm just really looking forward to the new challenge and starting over. There's all kind of low grade hardwoods that need to be improved, and cedars to be cut, and more prescribed fire, and I'll probably get done, and trails to make, and little hidey food plots to make. So I'm super excited about that.
Man, I totally get it. It's the puzzle, it's the mystery, it's trying to figure it all out. That's what does it. It's the shot, the trigger pull is just a tiny little bit of it, and I'm excited for you.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to it.
Awesome. So I'm sure we'll be able to see all that on Growing Deer this coming fall and next year as you keep working on it.
Yeah, Mark, as we we make a new show every week, and so we don't have a production calendar like a lot of people do. That's great. I'm glad they do. We just filming every week, so we're filming whatever we're doing. So yeah, I have ideas for about 10 hidey food plots. We're going to start them because we'll be planting in about a month, and that means we're killing some saplings or having little prescribed fires to make a seed bed. We're just come along and see what we do.
It sounds like a heck of an interesting thing to follow along with. Well, Grant, thank you. I knew this was going to be great. It proved to be so, and I really appreciate you sharing this with us.
Mark, I appreciate your friendship, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Let's get together soon. It'd be great to catch up more in person.
Love to.
All right, and that is a wrap. Thank you for listening. That was good, wasn't it? That was fun. It's got me ready. I mean, I am so ready. If any of you guys have listened this year on the podcast, you know that last season was a challenging one for me. Kind of burnt out by the end of the year. Took a little bit of time away this winter, and I am fully recharged. I am fully jacked to get back after it, and this one really helped continue that momentum. So be sure to go follow on with Grant's stuff. Like I mentioned already, Growing Deer is a terrific YouTube show. Everything he puts out is just top notch. There's lots and lots to learn from Grant. So be sure to subscribe, follow along with his stories. And until next time, my friends, thank you and stay wired to hunt.